Hey everyone, my name is Brian. After many years of building with Angular, I'm here to help you level up your skills and build better apps. Ever built a directive with public methods or signals, only to realize you can't cleanly access them from your template? You reach for viewChild, but it feels like overkill, especially when you're not even using it in code. In this video, I'll show you how to fix that using exportAs, signals, and a modern declarative API, just like Angular Material does. Let's build something better. This is our app. Looks pretty good at first glance. And just so you know, all of the code examples for this demo are linked to in the description so you can easily follow along. Okay, so we have a 3-step wizard: personal info, work details, and confirm. But wait, every step is showing at once. The navigation buttons don't do anything. This wizard is purely decorative. Let's take a look under the hood to see what's going on. First, let's open up the template for the AppRoot component. Here, we're using a directive called step tracker on this div and passing in some step labels as an input. Inside, we've got the markup for our 3 steps. Also, down here at the bottom, we have the 3 buttons to control the step tracker, but only the submit is actually configured to do anything. So the idea here is that this step tracker directive is used to manage the state for the wizard. So let's take a look at its logic now. Here we have the basic foundation for the directive: a current signal that tracks which step we're on, and 3 methods: next, previous, and reset. But right now, there's no way to actually call any of those directly from the template. Let's try to fix that. Let's jump back to the root component HTML and try something that feels intuitive. Let's add a template reference variable named wizard. This should allow us to access the public methods and properties on this directive. So let's use the click event on the next button to call the next method on the step tracker. Okay, one last thing here. Let's add an alert in our next function so that we can see if it's actually getting called or not. Looks like it should work. But boom, we get an error. Angular doesn't know what wizard is. Let's figure out why. This variable by itself just gives us a reference to the div element. If we want a reference to the directive instance, we have to be more specific. Well, one way we can access this directive is to use a viewChild. Let's open up the code for the root component again. Now let's create a property called wizard. We'll set it using the viewChild function, making it required, and then passing it the step tracker directive as its selector. Okay, now we can update the template. Let's remove the wizard reference variable. Then, since the viewChild function gives us a signal, we need to add parentheses. Okay, now let's save that. Now I'll click it and it works. So that's one way to do it, but now we're back to imperative Angular. We don't have any need to access this directive instance from the TypeScript here, so in this case it feels a little like reaching behind the curtain instead of working with the framework. I think we can do better here. Now, if this were a component, the first example with the template reference variable would have worked just fine. We would have been able to get access to the component that way. This directive is a different story though. Template reference variables default to the component instance, but not for directives. That's where exportAs comes in. This will create an alias that can then be accessed with a template reference variable. Let's call it stepper. Now let's go remove the viewChild concept. Okay, now back in the template, let's use this new alias. Let's add back the wizard template reference variable. But this time we need to set it to our stepper alias. Then we can remove the parentheses since this is no longer a signal. And we can also add the previous click event too. Okay, now let's save it again. Now, when I click the next button, everything runs from the template. No imperative access needed. Clean, declarative, and even signal powered. Now let's add some logic to show the current step and hide the others. To do this, let's expose the current step index from the directive. Let's also remove this alert since we won't be needing it anymore. Now we can switch back to the root component template and add logic to conditionally show the current step. We'll wrap each of these steps in a condition based on the index using the aliased wizard reference variable. Okay, now let's save and see how it all works. Nice, now we're only seeing the current step. And when we click Next and Previous, yep, we're actually stepping through this now. So our wizard is stepping, but it's still walking into walls. Right now, if I'm on the last step and I click Next again, there's no step for me to navigate to, so instead, we actually get an error. Let's fix this. Let's improve this so we can't go past the last step or before the first one. Back in the directive, we need to add a few signals. First, let's add a total steps property. For this, we'll make it a computed signal based on the length of the step labels array signal. Next, let's add an isFirstStep property. This too will be a computed signal that will be truthy when the step index signal has a value of 0. And finally, let's add an isLastStep property, also a computed signal, that will be truthy when the step index signal is equal to the total steps minus 1. Okay, now we can update our next method. Here, we only want this to update if we're not on the last step. Now, we want the opposite on the previous method, so it will only update if we're not on the first step. Now, let's switch back to the root component template. First, on the back button, let's disable it when the wizard is on the first step. Now, we want to hide the next button on the last step, so let's add a condition for this. To contrast, we only want to show the submit button on the last step, so let's add an else for this. Now let's save and try it out. So it looks like back is properly disabled here on the first step, and we can't navigate using this button. But if we go forward, then we can also go backwards. And then when we navigate to the last step, now the next button is replaced by the submit button. This feels much more polished now, but there's still a little more we can do. Let's make the wizard header feel more dynamic. Let's add to this message here. Let's add the string interpolated value of the current step using the index +1. And then let's add the total number of wizard steps. Next, we want to add the current step label, so let's switch back to the directive. Now, let's add a new property named currentLabel, and it will be another computed signal. This time, we'll get the label from the step labels array using the step index. And we'll fall back to an empty string if no label exists. Okay, now let's switch back to the component template and add this label. That's it. Let's save and see what this looks like. Nice. Here we can see that we're on step 1 of 3. And this step has a label of enter your personal info. Then, as we navigate to the next step, we can see everything update correctly. Pretty cool stuff, right? It's a fully reactive declarative stepper powered by a simple directive using exportAs. And you might see this type of thing a lot if you're using Angular material at all. Here's a very similar example, set up this time using the material stepper. We have similar steps in content, and here on the stepper, we have a wizard template reference variable set to the mat stepper. This is available because they're using exportAs with a value of mat stepper under the hood, just like we did. And then we can access it in the same way. Here, we're using the wizard variable and the mat stepper's selected index variable to display the current step we're on. So, as we navigate through the steps, we can see it properly updates. Then we also use the mat stepper's reset method on this button. So when we click that, everything resets. It's pretty much the same pattern that we created in our example. So that's exportAs, the little known key to unlocking clean, declarative directive and component APIs in Angular. It lets you interact with your directives and components directly from the template, just like Angular Material sometimes does. Just remember, you probably don't need exportAs if you're only accessing the directive from your component class. You're not exposing behavior to the template, or your component is purely visual or static. But if you're building anything reusable, interactive, or template-driven, exportAs may be your new best friend. And if you're building a directive like this in Angular, try using it and let me know how it goes in the comments. Also, if you found this helpful, hit the like button, subscribe, and check out my Angular merch store. We've got shirts, posters, and maybe even a stepper-themed mug coming soon. But no promises. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.